I love technology. A lot of times I can't use it. Sometimes it doesn't work. But in general, I really like technology. But you know, I'm not alone. I think there's people in the room who love technology too, because if Facebook was a country, it would be the third largest in the world. 2 people join LinkedIn every second. There's 58 million tweets per day, 6 billion searches on Google, and 7 billion smart devices or cell phones in the world. That's about as many as people. It's about 1 to 1. And in some countries, there's more, the ratio is higher. So clearly, we live in a digital world. It has really shifted. And that's what today's presentation is about. So what I did, this is a couple of years ago, is I put together in a room like this a large group of people, politicians, educators, librarians, executives, startups, entertainment people, futurists, and we had a think tank. And we stayed there all day, brought in research, and projected in a digital world, what is the future of work? What are the key skills that we should be thinking about? And where will our careers be going? And so I'm going to walk you through today, actually, the 9 forces and the 10 skills. Now, this is a treat for me because usually I am told, Tracy, keep your presentation to 20 minutes. As the first time someone came to me and said, you've got 2 hours. And now you're all panicking, right? 2 hours. So we'll try to be fluent here and interesting. So let's just talk about first some of the forces that we saw impacting work. Extreme longevity. Think about it. Those are the generations up there, right? You can see maybe you're a boomer, maybe you're a Gen X, maybe you're a Gen Y or millennial. Fact is you're living longer. You're living to 100. You may have seen the National Geographic magazine with the baby on the front that said a baby born today will live to 120. It is mind-boggling. People cannot imagine themselves living to 100. So in my research for Women Lead, I asked over 200 women, what does it mean to you if you're going to live to 100? Because I was interested, after all, right now, women are living longer than men. So we have to really think about it. And they said, you know, Tracy, if I'm living to 100, I have to afford to live to 100. And if I need to afford to live to 100, that means I have to work until I'm 80 or more. If I'm going to live till I'm 80, well, my goodness, I have to stay healthy enough to live to 80. I have to stay educated enough to get a job, to stay in a job till 80. And I certainly have to stay technology fluent enough to be able to participate in society. Oh, woe is me, right? Well, the executives in the room said, woe is you. Look at me, I'm running this company and I've got 3 generations in the workforce. And McDonald's piped up and said, no, I've got 4 generations in the workforce. What a headache it is for an executive to imagine, right, 4 generations in the workforce. You come from different environments, different education, different technology. It's mind-boggling to be able to train, right, coordinate companies today, right? So it's really changed a lot. Extreme longevity, major force. Number 2, we live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's actually an Army term. It's how military, when they go out into the field, deal with every day. You just don't know. And our business leaders in the room said, that's what it's like running a company today. It is volatile. You don't know when there's a natural disaster. It is uncertain. You don't know when there's a terrorist attack. It's complex. You don't know when that litty bitty startup might come and eat your lunch and take your whole business away. VUCA world. So what do we need? They said, well, we really need people. We need people who can lead, innovate, and create at work or create work in a VUCA world. forces. Smart machines and automation. Now I try to slip in some video clips that I pull off of YouTube to illustrate some points. I was in New York a couple of weeks ago to a hotel, stopped by, it's called Yotel. Very interesting. They have completely eliminated the bellboy. The bellboy is now a robotic arm. It comes in, it picks up your luggage, it checks you in, and when you leave, it pulls out your luggage and checks you out. Is that as we're in a more automated world, smart machines and software may displace, replace, or enhance many jobs. So it's something to think about in your world. I did pull this because this was just on the television actually 2 nights ago. Because people say about robotics, does this help us or is this replacing us? South Korea Ferry, they are using this little guy. If you saw it on CNN, it's about this big, to go into the ferry crevices and crannies where a person can't go, or it's so deep that a person can't survive, to try to find our survivors. So let me just give you a little taste of that. New media ecology. They say that 75% of us are actually more visually inclined, visual learners. In fact, we absorb the world in what we see. Today, 18 to 34-year-olds actually watch more YouTube than the television. So they have migrated actually from a visual world in one discipline to another visual world, right? The video streaming world. So this is becoming the new language, and we'll get into some of the skills around living in a visual world. But just take from a hotel. So you go in, right? You may have a hotel person in one city, but in a lot of places where I go, I don't even have a concierge anymore. I have a virtual concierge who is sitting somewhere else talking to me using multimedia. Globally connected world, flat world labor. I call it from eBay to Elance, right? So eBay is an electronic marketplace. I'm sure many of you have heard of it or even use it. I actually opened a storefront and took international currency in a matter of hours. I became an international business in a matter of hours. That was unheard of when I got out of high school or college. International business meant exporting, shipping goods in one direction, and then translating the currency back. It's phenomenal that you can do that today. And companies are doing that. Companies are born global. But now let's talk about Elance. You may have heard about them. That's a marketplace of labor. I use it, you may use it too. I go out to Elance, which used to be Odesk, or freelancer.com is another one, and I look for people to help me with data analysis, editing, video production, search, and I find them everywhere in the world for about $2 an hour. Very interesting dynamic going on, right? Yes, we can have international visit and market to the world, but at the same time, I can go out and find labor. So as the economist in our group said, geez, you know, your competition today is not just your neighbor next door anymore. It's the entire world, and everyone is vying for your job, and they are becoming educated and skilled, and they can do it for a lot less. So the dynamics have changed in a global, globally connected world and flat world labor. So then we said, well, what does this mean about work? What will the future of work really look like? Let's think about that. So we said, well, superstructing concept, of course. What is the new office about anyway? Well, if you're out by me, I live in Silicon Valley, you have companies like Google, Apple, Facebook. You know, they're all creating what we call these mega campuses. You may have seen photographs of them, huge campuses. Facebook is building dorms. Apple has, right, the whole loop and food. Google's got volleyball and unlimited food on campus, right, to keep people there. Why? Because there's a belief in the engineering communities that they're more innovative if they work together. Design mindset. How do we design work so that we can be more productive? This is the philosophy of these companies. But then we also had in the room Cisco, Price Waterhouse, Ernst & Young, and they said, no, wait a minute. We have salespeople. We have consultants. We have customers. The way that works better for us is actually not in a big campus where everyone is together, but actually where our employees are out, teleworking, telecommuting, or even being on site with the customer, because that's intimacy. And that's how we get work done. So that's a whole different way of designing workplaces. But then the startups in the room said, wait a minute. You really don't need buildings anymore. And yeah, telecommuting, but really what it is, it's this. It's my smart device. This is work. This is how I create work. This is a smart device, but a smart device, right? This can be anywhere because this is how I go to work. In fact, I just took a taxi from Dulles to the hotel, and they slide the credit card, right, in the phone, square, right? This is his work, the car and the phone. So it's interesting. This is actually a hotel in New York City called the Ace Hotel. This is where entrepreneurs in the neighborhood go to work. They bring their devices. There's wireless there. There's some food there, mainly because it's social. They want to be around other entrepreneurs. So these kind of collaborative areas are bubbling up everywhere. It might even be in your library. So work has changed, right? From the farm to the factory to the knowledge economy to now very digital. And in certain cases, just very different. So I said, well, while we're talking about work, do you really think in the future that firms will even exist? I mean, what you've just told me is that work can be designed to be productive, the nature of work, to make a product, to make a service. So if I look at the statistics now, 1 in 3 people in the United States are actually freelancing. They're not really going to any one office anymore. That's 40 million Americans. In fact, there's a freelance union now. So are we really workers and employees of companies, or are we individual agents? And do I need to start thinking of myself as a skilled agent? Kind of like the movie production industry, right? Where they pull in the actors, the actresses, right? The producers, and you hope you get the A team. So do I need to start thinking individually about being an A player? And on the firm side, how do I keep attracting A players and producing products or services that the consumer really wants? So what will work really look like? Let me add in another overlay. Here we are in a technology-based world. I work for companies like Cisco Systems, which are all networks. I work with companies like Oracle, which are all databases. HP, printers, Apple devices, smart devices. Well, right now it's all contextual and they're talking to each other. In the future of work, is it just a bunch of systems navigating and talking to other systems, right? Smart machines, sensors, it's here. A lot of it is here. Gives you a lot to think about the future of work. So then we said, well, what about the skills? What kind of skills do I really need to be employable in this digital future world? So let me give you a couple of examples. Sense-making. I call it uber critical thinking, right? Making sense of the deeper context of data. So let me just give you an example. You have stores out here at Nordstrom, right? So last July, I got a call from Nordstrom in my area. And they said, Tracy, we miss you. And I said, you miss me? And they go, yeah, we really miss you. I go, how could you miss me? You don't even know who I am. And they go, oh, yes, we do. We do. We've actually been tracking you for 3 years because of your credit card purchases. We know what departments you shop in. We know what kinds of brands you buy. In fact, we think you're a traveler and a business person from the clothes that you wear. And we even think we know who your favorite sales rep is based on how you mark up and when you come in. So they said, but here's what we know about you. You come in every December and you come in every August because that's when we have our sales. It makes sense. But you didn't come in last December. So we said, oh, well, maybe she's traveling because she's a business person, or maybe she's taking the holiday somewhere. But God forbid we lost her to Neiman and Marcus or Barney's. So we want to make sure you come back this August. So Tracy, we're going to give you a $50 gift certificate. And it's going to be right here at the store for you to come on in. I said, okay, great, I'll be there. I get off the phone, I call up HR, Nordstrom, going, what the heck are you guys doing over there? And they go, well, we're in Silicon Valley. Data, it's the new lifeline, right? The new blood here. Isn't the data scientist the sexiest, right, career of the future? Right, so they said we brought in some data scientists and we're trying to make sense of the data, because we really are known for customer orientation and we want to embrace our customers even more, and perhaps technology and data can help us. And of course, they want to enhance my shopping experience, so of course I buy more. So data, sense making. How do you make sense of the data? New media literacy. I mentioned that we live in a multimedia world. Well, that's a skill. Many people in the room said we actually need people who can go to work and actually communicate, right? You think about blogs today. You think about social media today. There's always a photo, right? Or there's a little video clip, or even today I'm using video clips to be able to express. So it's a highly desired skill to be able to be fluent not only in text and language, but also have that knowledge of how do I blend in multimedia and simulations. So I'm going to give you an example of how multimedia is actually used in healthcare. Computational thinking. So let's just go back to data and translation of data. In this example, what I'll talk about is how, you may have read the MIT book about, are we competing with machines or are we competing against machines? So we had actually IBM in the room in my think tank from Almaden, and you might remember Watson, right? So Watson is a supercomputer which is pumped up with a lot of information, right? And so if you go to play Jeopardy with Watson, you pretty much lose, right? And they put Watson on TV and they had the players come in, and Watson was just, super smart. Because if you think about it, Watson is cycling through data at a much faster pace than your human brain, right? Can digest it and be able to come up with the answers. But IBM said, well, that's sort of competing against a machine, right? So that's nice, and it made a nice little TV blip. But really, what could we do with supercomputers, right? What could we do that's useful to society? So their health practice said, why don't we take Watson and pump them up with all the information we can find about cancer, causes, symptoms, prescriptions, solutions, even controversial ways that people are treating it. Push all the data into Watson, right? Let Watson calculate it and see, can we cure cancer maybe years before than we could on our own, right? So they said, well, let's not stop here. They moved Watson off to the Cleveland Clinic. And the doctors sat there and said, well, why don't we use Watson to learn all the prescriptions in the world, right? Why should a physician have to memorize all of these prescriptions and maybe even write them in the wrong way, could Watson become mini Watsons that have all the prescriptions so that when they have very specific symptoms, we can give the right solution? Well, it didn't stop there. Watson kept going east. Watson's now in New York City, in Silicon Alley, because they said if you have this much computational power, why don't we put Watson out there as an incubator? Maybe it could solve financial, right, with the stock market. Let's put the data in there. Let's open up Watson and say to anyone in the research world, bring your data. Let's see how supercomputers and artificial intelligence can help you solve a problem. Competing now with machines, right, to scope out much larger problems. Computational thinking. Now, the key with this I want to highlight is you need people to be able to work with Watson. You need people who can understand what to do with a Watson, right? So that's a special skill there. You not only do you have to understand, right, your subject matter expertise, but now you have to be able to translate it so that our supercomputer can be able to give you the results that you're looking for. It's a skill. Design mindset. Now, I mentioned how companies were being designed. Very interesting. This was a hotel. I was in Europe, and they decided to reposition themselves for rock stars. So they said the way that they did it is that they redesigned, right, with the mindset of a musician. From the minute they got out of the lobby all the way up into the bedrooms. And what they did is they put in the bedrooms, plugged in guitars with headsets, because they said musicians like to practice in the middle of the night. And then they had a concert hall on the top level. And they try to walk through the life of a musician, which is very different than a business traveler, and design the hotel to be very appealing to people in the music industry. They picked the colors, they did the foods, they did their hours to really accommodate the music industry. So design mindset, and you see hotels are doing that, restaurants are doing that, stores are doing that. What is the mind of the consumer, and how do we design around it? So this, can anyone tell me what that is? Yeah, a C-scan. Designing around the environment of a child who needs to go in and get a C-scan, right? Pretty amazing. Hospitals in particular are thinking through patient care. How do we design that experience to calm the person, to make them comfortable, to make a nice environment for them? Very interesting. Social intelligence. A lot of people ask me, is social intelligence emotional intelligence? And it's not. So we discussed this in our think tank. And we described it as emotional intelligence is around the emotion, right? But social intelligence is being able to combine the intelligence of socialness. Now remember, socialness overlaps into Facebooks and LinkedIn's, right? It kind of crosses over, plus your experience. So let me give you an example. I travel a lot for work, and and at that time when I was traveling, I was working at Cisco, and my job was to look at universities. The universities, how they were laid out, visit the libraries, look at the data centers, meet the professors, meet the IT people, and understand actually the future of education. I was in Amsterdam, and I was out visiting different universities. And it was really cold. I remember this. It was really cold and rainy. And I was walking around a university which has a lot of steps, and my back went out, right? Walking down, you just know that feeling when you just want to collapse. But the Dutch didn't let me collapse. They said, no, Tracy, we have to keep going. We have to get through this tour, and then we'll drop you off at your hotel. So I was in a lot of pain. I was in a lot of pain when they dropped me off in front of the hotel. Interesting enough, this hotel was all stairs. The way that you get to your bedroom, the way that you get to the restaurant was always using stairs. There's no elevators. It was a historic hotel. Lucky me. I was up on the 4th floor. So I'm walking in the hotel entranceway, And across the room was the woman at the front desk. And it was crowded, you know, and she kind of spotted me, and I must have been really hobbling. I wasn't crying, I swear I wasn't crying. And she came over and she said, "You're in pain." And I said, yeah, you know, I pulled my back out, not feeling so good. In fact, I'm gonna go sit right on that couch for a minute. And she said, "You know what, just sit there for a minute. Let me just go look up a couple of things." So she comes back to me and she said, "Well, Dr. Wilen, you're on the 4th floor." And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "That's not good if you have a bad back." She said, "I took the liberty of changing your room, if you don't mind, to one right on this floor. In fact, it has a nice tub in it too, which you didn't have in your room, because I think that if you have a bad back, you might like to have a nice tub." And I said, "Oh my God, thank you very much." And she said, "It's no charge, but you know, you just sit there." She said, "Here's another thing. See, you're American, and here in Holland," she said, "we actually have chiropractic masseuses." She said, they're better than the masseuses in the States. And she said, "They're very inexpensive here." And she said, "And you don't need a doctor's appointment to get in with a medical masseuse. So here, would you like me to call one for you?" I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "I'll have them come down to the hotel. It's very inexpensive. And I'll send him over to your room. And he'll just stay there until your back feels better." I said, "Oh my God, thank you very much. This is incredible." And she said, "You know, before you go into your room, one more thing." She said, "The restaurant, you have to walk stairs. That's not going to be a good idea for you." She said, "There's this really nice boutique cafe across the street." She said, "All us professionals, that's where we go and we get our dinners on the go. And you can get wine and beer and nice little salads." She said, "How about I send the menu to your room, you pick out some things, and we'll have it sent to your room. This way you can eat your dinner, have your chiropractic massage, have your hot bath, and hopefully you'll be better in the morning." And I said, "Oh my God, what was this?" That was social intelligence. This woman knew her job, right? She knew what she could do in the hotel. She figured out, here's a person who needs a better room. She's only here one night, one extra night. I could give her the empty room. I know the area, right? So I can figure out how to make her more comfortable. And I put myself in her shoes. I understand that if I were somewhere in the world and that happened to me, wouldn't have that been an amazing experience? Well, you can imagine how many letters of gratitude that I wrote. I always go to that hotel now, right? That customer service orientation. But really, it was social intelligence. She knew how to read what was going on and apply her experience. Cross-cultural competency. You know, we talked about this of how working with other cultures. Now, years ago when I worked at Apple, right, and did international business, it was pretty much that one way, right? This is way before the eBays were out there, real old, when the Apple still had many colors. And we would fly all over the world to meet people, right? And that's how we got international business done. And cross-cultural meant competency, language, right? Maybe you knew a few words, but basically, you know, learn a little bit about the foods. There really just wasn't too much training. In fact, a little bit like the movie Lost in Translation. I just pulled the feeling of what it was like when we first went, right, overseas on business. But flash forward now, right, I'm out of Apple, I've gone on to HP, and now I'm at a company called Cisco Systems. And Cisco is very into their technology. So all of a sudden now, international business takes on a new element. It isn't about just flying overseas anymore or them coming to you. It now means that we need to have virtual collaboration, run cross-cultural teams using technology developing skills to be able to do exactly what you were doing overseas at a long distance. So let me started to become handled not only using telepresence but with the overlay of holography. Today you're probably hearing about the phones now having holographic images that will come out of them so that you can actually continue your virtual collaboration with business partners pretty much just looking at your phone or smart device. You may have also heard about applications like video where you can actually have 5 people on one smartphone in teleconferencing doing real-time video, right? It's almost like 5 Skypes all together on one phone. Well, let's just take it a step further, right? Because collaboration can happen in a number of ways. This is the AnyBot. I actually took these photos when I was at Stanford. So here I am in a room, and in comes Rolls, the robot now, combined with telepresence in the head, right? And Andrea is actually in that robot, but Andrea is in India. She's coming in for the meeting. She's controlling it and talking through the AnyBot from her laptop. And pretty much you can check in or check out these AnyBots. And there's lots of different form factors going on now today. So Andrea comes in, right, and we adjust her height, right, so she and I can look side by side. And she checks into the meeting and participates. She moves around with us, walks the floor, right? And when she's done, she checks out and Joe checks in. But Joe's over in Europe. And Joe's up for the next part of the meeting. And we're still in one space, but we're collaborating with people around the world now. So we talked about what are the implications of an AnyBot, different than a telepresence, right? Because now we can bring doctors somewhere, right, remotely. We can bring librarians somewhere remotely. We can bring practitioners around the world. I was thinking in manufacturing, one of my jobs at Apple was walking up and down the inventory factory lines. Well, it would have been a lot easier if I just did the AnyBot and walked up and down the lines. So virtual collaboration, novel and adaptive thinking. How can you use technology to create and think in a different way, right? How can we do that? Well, let me give you an example. Talk about 3D printing. So first, and then how this moves into novel and adaptive thinking. Are people familiar with 3D printers? Okay. So, and in fact, you can go into the Microsoft store now and you can see them. Interesting enough, in manufacturing, we used to make prototypes, right? Before we actually made a computer or made a keyboard, we'd go down the street in Silicon Valley and we have these people make these little prototypes for us, because before you went into manufacturing, right, you wanted to make sure everything was just right. So now prototypes have moved to 3D printing. And a 3D printer you can pour in, if you can imagine, liquid plastic or liquid metal. Give it information and it will print for you your prototype. So that's a big breakthrough in manufacturing, and actually all those little shops now have either gone away or turned into 3D prototyping. On the right actually is a drawing of a 3D home in Amsterdam. The idea is that you can be more efficient with architecture, right? So 3D printing isn't just limited to manufacturing anymore. Can you print out pieces of a house, and that's what they're doing, and in a year from now they will assemble this house made from completely a 3D printer. So here is the ability to understand how the medical side can cross over with the technology side, right? How can we use the technology of 3D printing, make an ear, right, and be able to advance technology and healthcare. And I'd like to remind you that he is a medical doctor and a technologist, right? So he has the medical background and the technology background so that he can come up with the idea of actually being able to use technology to advance science. Now, it made me think of, I was at Tech Day at Microsoft for girls, and I said, oh, I love that 3D printer. It reminds me of when I grew up. We had this Susie bake oven, right? Sugar and spice and everything nice, what a little girl's made of, and we all got like a Susie bake oven. And I was kind of intrigued because it was a little bit electric. But today, girls can grow up and they can make their own toys on the 3D printers. And if they really want to make a cake, well, they use the 3D printer to make the icing and all of the ornaments around it. So 3D printing is really expanding into so many different areas. And novel and adaptive thinking, I'm sure there will be more and more. I just saw how a dress was made with 3D printing. Smart machines and automation, I'd like to revisit cars. When I grew up, cars had 4 wheels, and I changed the oil. Right? There's a good chance today that you probably don't change the oil on your car if you bought a car in the last 5 or 7 years ago. In fact, you're probably waiting for something to beep at you on your dashboard or get a text message to say, bring your car in for oil service or some sort of maintenance, because cars have really become mobile devices on wheels. And in fact, there's so many different kinds of cars. The Nano in India, which is one of the least expensive cars in production. The Bugatti, which is one of the most expensive cars. The Mini, which actually in the factory is 90% made by robots. I think it's only the final inspection and spray paint are humanly done. The electric car, the natural gas car, and of course the autonomous robotic car, which I see every day in Silicon Valley being tested on the freeways. So cars in themselves have actually gotten quite digital, quite computerized, quite complicated. So much so that General Motors actually has a call center. The call center is for people like me. I go to LAX airport, I go to rent a car, they hand me something, it isn't a key. I go up to the door, I start pushing buttons, and the trunk pops open. Right? So I'm sitting here totally confused on how to use the car. I finally figure out how to get into the car, and I don't know how to use the GPS, right? So now I'm getting really frustrated because I don't know how to start the car, I don't know how to use the GPS, and it's way too mechanical, so I look for the Mayday button. Mayday, Mayday, they're right there now. And I push it, and General Motors call center gets on the phone going, yes, Miss Wilen, what's wrong? I can't start the car, right? So they help me start the car. In fact, there's a whole future around call centers and demystifying technology. So I said to GM, is it just people like me who don't know how to use modern day electronic cars? They said, heck no. The dealers call all the time. They have to figure out how to sell these things, and half of them don't understand the features. So cars are so simple. Why do I bring it up? Well, BMW said, you know, repairing a car is also gotten very complex, and just as complex. And if you thought it was going to get any easier, it isn't, because as I mentioned, we have the autonomous car. And this was really interesting because I was up in San Francisco giving a webinar with all of our think tank people, by the way, and we had 1,000 people attend the webinar because they wanted to understand the future of work. And I was going back in a taxi to the train station. And the taxi driver said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we had this webinar, and all these people came because they wanted to know about the future of work. And he said, I won't have a job in the future. And I said, what do you mean you won't have a job in the future? He said, because Google applied for permits. They already have them in Las Vegas. But they would like to have in San Francisco their autonomous cars become the taxi service of choice. And he said, because, you know, their technology, he said, they're going to have it here. He said, I'm convinced by 2018, San Francisco Bay Area will only have taxi cars using robotic cars. And he said, and I thought I had a job for life. He said, I actually thought being a driver would never be replaced. He said, I didn't really get skilled at anything else. I don't know anything else. And I never thought that I would be automated out of a job. Now for Google's side, oops, I didn't put in the Google side, their concern is accidents, handicapped drivers, people with cell phones, people who eat food, people who shave, people who do their nails and their makeup when they're driving. Why do we have to have any kind of crashes or injuries around cars? Can't we use automation to solve that problem? Cognitive load management, skill, basic skill. Every day you're probably coming into your laptop or your PC or your office and your emails have probably tripled. How do you deal with that? At the same time, there's probably 10 newspapers, right? Many more than yesterday. It's not one anymore. You probably have to read a lot more books and ebooks. You probably subscribe to a lot of blogs, a lot of wikis, and now you have to sort through that in a data-enriched world. You might be using technology to manage the cognitive load, right? You might be sorting through. You might be having Outlook, right? Partition off your emails. But it's a skill that you need to develop today. How do you prioritize? How do you sort? How do you do this now in a very digital world? As one woman said, you know, what I do is I'm trying to wean myself off of a lot of work engagement. You know, can I be remote one day a week? Can I set up rules in my Outlook to be able to help me prioritize emails, to help me with my meetings? It's a difficult skill to develop, and it's one that you have to try to think about the technology versus what you can do. Filtering. Final skill. T people. The one walk away skill or person that everyone in the room agreed was transdisciplinarity. We called it the T person. It's a big word, right? What does it mean? Well, on the executive side, they said, you know, we really need people in companies today who have breadth and depth and a technology proficiency. So in earlier generations, the general manager, right, the person who was wide and had those skills that could manage people was popular. Then we went to the technology, the specialist, right? You know your marketing, you know your HR, you know your engineering. Today we need both. We need people who can think deep and can think broad, who can manage, but then put in the overlay that they have to understand the technologies that we use at work and the technologies that they use in their department, whether it's a database, whether it's a networking device, you know, whatever they're using. We need that combined person. Even the entrepreneur said the same thing. You really need to be able to understand how to start a business, go deep on your subject matter expertise, and then use the technology to market it, to engage with your customers. So it's a much more complicated world. Careers. So those are all forces and skills. That was a lot. That was more than I typically ever do. So I thank you for your patience. I'll just go through some of the career stuff and then we'll stop and take a break and then we can go on, if you want, to library visioning. Point is that we have shifted from a classical world to a digital world, right? So what does that mean? I was born in a classical world. A high school degree or a liberal arts degree was just enough for any kind of job out there. It was fine. The company took over and trained us, right? And then we switched to a digital world. In fact, by 2020, over 70% of jobs are viewed that they will have a digital or component. Number two is the jobs have changed. As I mentioned, 3 in 1 people today are freelancing, 40 million Americans. The average job churn or velocity is 4 years, 4 months, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, of how often people are changing jobs today. A second statistic is that companies aren't lasting as long as in the past. Many companies last up to 15 years. So we have this velocity happening. A career for people today will not look like a straight line of one place forever. It's going to look a lot like a maze or a chutes and ladder game, if you remember that. There's going to be ups, there's going to be down. You're going to be dipping in and dipping out to get educated, skilled, stops in life, movements, startups, right? Non-for-profits, entrepreneur, large companies. There's going to be a lot more movement than in the past. Interesting enough, when we looked at the data on career planning, college seniors, the group, right, with the highest unemployment today, this is how much time they spend career planning. It's an hour and a half a year. An hour and a half a year upon graduation. How much time do you think they spend sleeping? Almost 2,800 hours a year. The rest of the data was what we collected on what people like us do with our time. Leisure sports, eating and drinking, household activities, planning a wedding, buying a car, anything than career planning. An hour and a half a year. Now, why should you care? Well, you're probably going to spend about half your life and a third of your day working. So career planning, to me, is pretty important. But what's different about today is that we live in a very integrated world. It isn't really about one person working anymore, right? Most couples have both people working. It isn't about just going to work and coming home anymore, right? With digital world, everything is all integrated. You're always on. So don't we have to start thinking about life planning instead of career planning? How am I going to integrate all these facets of my life? This is just a chart that I give to people to start thinking about career life planning from your 10s to 100, because it's really hard for people to project. What are you going to do? Education, social, work, financial, and health, right? What are your objectives and how are you going to get there? And this is just an aggregation of how people populated their goals and what they would do to the life plan. So I'm going to end with a final video. Do people know the virtual choir? So the virtual choir, I'll just tell you the quick story. It's a music conductor, it's a music teacher. Fascinating. One of his students sang her aria into her computer and videotaped herself. And then she sent the file to the conductor, right, and said, could you take a look at this and give me feedback? And he looked at it and said, oh my God, this is beautiful, right? This woman is like, she's a very young woman, beautiful voice, beautiful singing. I never thought about creating a choir, right, taking videos. So he reached out using his social networking to the crowdsourced, and said, take this song and sing it and send me your video file and let me blend it together into a virtual choir. And he got thousands of responses from many countries, right? And then all of a sudden it became who got picked to be in the virtual choir, because then it got competitive. And then music teachers were using it to get their students more engaged with classes, right? Maybe if part of their project get picked. And musicians were using it as a way to add to their resume. Well, now he's on virtual choir number 8. That's how popular it has become.